Utyannathyamitramahah Arohannuttaran divam Hrutrogham mama surya Harimananchanashaya Shukeshu me harimanam Ropanaka sudatmasi Ato haritraveshu me Harimanannidatmasi Udagadayyamadityaha Vishvena sahasa saha Dvishantam mamarandayanna Mo ahandvishatoradham Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Namaskar. The Surya Namaskara mantra chanting was by Anne Loper, who is a student of Shantala Sri Ramaya. Shantala Sri Ramaya resides in Belgium, but she has learned Vedic chanting from the Veda Pandit Sri Chalakere brothers of Bangalore. And on every single session that we have had in this conference, it's one of our students from across the world who have chanted for us in the most beautiful manner with great devotion and dedication. Swagatam and welcome to all our esteemed speakers, guests and audiences from across the world to our annual event, Namaste 2021. This is a global Utsava of Indian soft power that's been brought to you by the Center for Soft Power, an arm of Indica, in collaboration with the ICCR. This morning's first session is crafted in India, Indian motifs. India has been a culture from time immemorial that has given great importance to art and craft. The diversity and variety of handmade in India is indeed mind-boggling. Whether it is the varied weaves or the crafts or visual arts, each region has its own genre, and in that region, there is again a lot of diversity. If you look at traditional crafts, all of it is divinity-centered, making handicrafts a meditative process. The other notable feature is the eco-friendly and sustainable nature of our crafts. So recently, I had a discussion with an archaeologist and architect who was studying Hampi, and he had this to say about it, and I was quite surprised. He said that when the original artisans of Hampi used the rocks, they had not disturbed any of the unique rock formations of the area, and they had only taken rocks that would not change the countryside in any which manner. Such was the respect to Mother Nature and environment in our culture, and I sure hope we do go back to that. I have to say go back to that because of late, world over, somewhere we have thought that the world was created for man to use, abuse, and misuse. And we have to understand that we are all a part and parcel of this creation, and the entire creation is divine. We have with us today a very special guest, the Indian ambassador to Japan, Ambassador Sri Sanjay Kumar Verma. Sri Sanjay Kumar Verma is an officer of the 1988 batch of the IFS, the Indian Foreign Service. He was stationed as the Consulate General of India, Hong Kong, and at the Embassy of India in China, Vietnam, and Turkey, before serving as the Consul General of India in Milan, in Italy. Ambassador Verma was also the Indian ambassador to the Republic of Sudan. Following his tenure at Sudan, he served as Joint Secretary, Global Estate Management in the Ministry of External Affairs, New Delhi. And prior to his arrival in Japan as the ambassador, he was posted in the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi again as an additional secretary administration was also in charge of the cyber diplomacy division. We thank you, sir, for accepting the invitation. I don't know whether he is coming. Srinivasji, has the Honorable Ambassador arrived?
Not yet come. Not yet.
Okay, so maybe we will start, and I'll hand it over to Arunima to introduce Dr. Tulika. And whenever he joins, we may have to, make space for him to speak then. And once again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Akka. A very warm welcome to everybody who's joined us with this session. Without taking much time, I'd like to welcome Dr. Tulika Gupta, who's the Director of Indian Institute of Crafts and Design in Jaipur. She's also the founding member of the Textile and Clothing Research Center. Previously, Dr. Tulika has served as a faculty member in NIFT, NID, and the Pearl Academy. She specializes in textile history, technique, craft, and dressing. Welcome, Dr. Tulika. It's a pleasure to have you with us this morning.
A very good morning to you, and thank you so much, Arunima. Thanks to Vijay Lakshmi ji and to the entire Soft Power team. It's a pleasure to be here on a very early Sunday morning, but I look forward to listening to all the speakers. It was such a wonderful message that has been conveyed to us today morning. Through all our handicrafts here, they work in sync with nature. There is a feeling of understanding of the material that is available to us, whether it's wood, metal, stone, whether it's textile, whether it's any kind of fiber, and how we extract material from there, how we use it, and how it is eco-friendly, mixes back with nature. So I think that is the strength of our crafts. We didn't have designers, we had craftspeople. They were the designers. They worked around nature, they worked around human beings. And I think it's a pleasure to be a part of this discussion today. So without further ado, I will just share today's plan of action. We will start with Ms. Judy Freita's presentation, followed by Dr. Kevin Murray's presentation. After that, Srimati Shanti Chandrasekhar will present, and then it will be Malvika Shivkumarji. Once we are done with the presentations, we will open the house for question answers. So to begin with, I would like to introduce our first speaker today, Ms. Judy Freita. Everyone who's in the field of crafts has heard of Ms. Judy Freita. She's a social entrepreneur steeped in the world of contemporary textile artisans of Kutch, India. She lived in Kutch for almost 30 years, during which she co-founded and operated Kala Raksha Trust, a cooperative for women embroiderers, established the Kala Raksha Textile Museum, and also founded the Kala Raksha Vidyalaya. And this was the first design school for traditional artisans. And for this concept and for executing it, Ms. Freita was awarded an Ashoka Fellowship for Social Entrepreneurship in 2003. Under her tenure as director, Kala Raksha Vidyalaya received international recognition for its unique approach to education of artisans. And coming from an institute which deals in crafts and design, I really admire her for her accomplishments. Ms. Judy Freita also received Sir Misha Black Medal for Distinguished Services to Design Education in 2009, and the Crafts Council of India Kamla Award in 2010. She has a list of distinguished service awards, and with that, I would just like to invite her. Of course, I must mention her threads of embroidery, threads of identity, embroidery and adornment of the nomadic Rabadis received the Costume Society of America's award. And prior to her residence in India, she was associate curator of the Eastern Hemisphere collection at the Textile Museum in Washington, DC. I welcome you, ma'am. Namaste.
Namaste. So, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for that welcome. And I want to thank everyone for inviting me to this webinar. I'm happy and very honored to be here. Today, I would like to share my screen. So let me do that. Okay. So today, what I would like to speak about, in keeping with the theme of the webinar, is my experiences with textile motifs as expression of cultural heritage. The first thing to understand is that traditional craft, and here I want to make a distinction between traditional craft and handmade. It's a very important distinction for me. And traditional craft, that is the craft that's practiced by people whose forefathers practiced that craft and handed it down. It is not industry. Industry speaks of production, but traditional craft speaks of culture. Along with skills, it's much more than skills. Traditional craft speaks of history and aesthetics and knowledge. It tells the stories of artisans, their origins, their journeys, their relationships, their experiences. My field, as Mrs. Gupta mentioned, is in Kutch. And yes, I worked there for 30 years. And in Kutch, way before I was there, traditionally, artisans worked in a system. They worked together to create exquisite textiles for themselves, for their families, and also for other very intimately known people. So here on the right, we see a Rabari woman wearing that ludi, which is a woolen veil that I showed you in the previous slide. Now this veil would be made, first of all, the Rabari woman would spin wool from her own sheep. She would give it to a weaver. The weaver would weave it, and the weaver would give it to a Khatri dyer to decorate it with bandhani. And then it would come back to the Rabari woman and she would embroider it. So all of these people, the Rabari woman, the weaver, and the dyer, they all knew each other and would have known, their ancestors would have known each other. So this is all of this, and the traditional craft speaks of this. Now, the other important thing to understand is that today, artisans of Kutch and all over India live and work in a very sophisticated, complex urban craft ecosystem. And what I want to say is that traditions evolve. They're not static. If it's a living tradition, if it's cultural heritage, it's always evolving. And so it's important for artisans, if they're working in a living tradition, to acknowledge, to speak of and speak to this current situation. Okay, for me, what is essential to a living tradition is the creative agency of artisans. To be able to be a living tradition, cultural heritage has to, the artisans have to have a dynamic situation where they are directly connected to their consumers. And they need to be able to tell their own story, right? To keep it a living tradition. And I felt that in order to be able to do this most effectively, to tap into their creative agency, they needed appropriate education. And that was the impetus that led me to begin the program in design and later business and management for artisans in Kutch, textile artisans in Kutch. So as Mrs. Gupta mentioned, it began as Kalaraksha Vidyalaya. Today, it operates as Somaya Kala Vidya. And we have had almost 200 graduates over a period of 14 years. The 15th year is currently suspended. And what I would like to do now is introduce you to just a few of those graduates so that you can understand how cultural heritage evolves to be a living tradition. Oh, sorry. We begin with weaving. Traditionally in Kutch, weavers wove woolen textiles for Rabari pastoralists and also cotton textiles for settled agriculturists. In the upper left, we see a dablo, which is a Rabari man's shoulder cloth and blanket. That was one, that and the ludi that I showed you were two of the traditional weavings that were made. Now, as times changed, the market changed, shawls were introduced in around the 1960s. And there are many artisans today who believe that the shawl is the traditional textile of weavers of Kutch, because traditions evolve. So in the center photo on the top, on the right side, we have what is known as a traditional Bujodi shawl. Next to it is an innovation on that shawl, a contemporary innovation made by Pachanbai, who we see on the right. Pachanbai also recently did a collection of weavings that he showed at the International Folk Art Market here in Santa Fe that expressed his concern for climate change. I'm wearing the same scarf that's in the photo in a different color. So in this blue one, what we see is Pachan is talking about his tradition at a crossroads. In the center at the top of that scarf, you see the tradition represented by a chomak, which is a very traditional motif, next to a tree. And he feels that we have two ways to go. If we retain, as Ms. Vijay Lakshmi explained in the opening, if we retain that eco-friendly aspect of craft, we can keep things green. If not, we could contribute to the demise of our environment. So now we have Bharatbhai, another weaver from Kutch, who is drawing from the same tradition, but coming up with a very different look for this collection that he's made. And the purple and the blue pieces are from a new collection that he made, inspired by blooming flowers. Okay, Bandhani, another very well-loved and famous textile from Kutch. Now the traditional, one of the most traditional Bandhani textiles was the Chandrakani, which is black with red dots. Now what you're seeing on the left side is what many people think is a Chandrakani today. It has already evolved. So, you know, my point is that traditions keep evolving. So here we have two Bandhani artists, Aziz Bhai at the top and Muskan Ben at the bottom. They've each taken the same tradition in different directions. So Muskan Ben is very free form, you know, she's has a very intense free form rendition of Bandhani in the dupatta that she's wearing. And it sort of evokes the much freer life that young women enjoy today. Aziz Bhai made a scarf on the right that's called Kutch Monsoon. And his inspiration was he was looking at a light bulb during the monsoon that gathers all the insects around it. So they're talking about their lives now. That's my point. Through their work, right? So now we have Ajrak. Ajrak is also a very famous Kutch textile, extremely intricate and very labor intensive block print with natural dyes. And Khalid Usman has taken in the scarf above him, in the dupatta, he's taken one element of a complex motif, isolated it, expanded it. And what he's doing is compelling us to look at the intricacy of his work and to appreciate it. And I think also, you know, traditionally textiles were very, very dense, right? And now life is no longer like that. So it's expanding. Another Ajrak artisan from the same village, also named Khalid Amin. He has a very different take on his tradition. And I'm showing the whole Ajrak here on the upper left. Ajrak is at least 15th century. That's the earliest examples of Ajrak that we have to look at, right? And Khalid was responding to 15th century fragments of Ajrak that were excavated in Fustat, Egypt. And what really amazed me about this piece is that he didn't just look at what was inside the fragment, he looked at the fact that it was a fragment. And here he's portraying a very fragmented kind of existence, a kind of world. You can see little bits of the Ajrak block prints in the center part, but it's bounded by tradition. So that is his world. Several different embroidery styles were practiced in Kutch by different ethnic communities. Suf embroidery is a geometric style, counted on the warp and weft, and very symmetrical and structured in its traditional layout, which is the white piece with the red embroidery. Tulsi Ben, all of these artisans that I'm talking about have been to our education program, right? So she participated in a co-design project with artisans in Oaxaca. This is today's world, through using WhatsApp and communicating with her partner. They realized that both Mexico and Kutch have coral reefs, and those coral reefs are endangered. So what they wanted to do was draw attention to that. And Tulsi Ben took her Suf embroidery in a very unique direction, I think, evoking coral reefs, and also maybe the free form existence that she, as Muskan Ben, is able to enjoy today. Okay, finally, I will go back to the original slide of my presentation, which is a Rabari pillow, and it's a tableau of a Rabari wedding, very traditional from, I think, maybe the 50s, maybe the 60s, 1950s or 1960s. And it shows many motifs depicting a Rabari wedding. In the center is a very abstract elephant. Now, even by the time this pillow cover was embroidered, elephants were no longer relevant in Rabari lives. This wasn't a motif that had been passed down and abstracted. And then in the blouse on the left, what you see is by 1980, that elephant was reinvented as a cupboard. Cupboard was relevant in the contemporary Rabari life of the 1980s. Sajinu Ben Rabari, in the center here, went back and took that elephant motif and reinvented it one more time to put in this jacket. And like Khalid Bai, she isolated the motif and elaborated it, compelling us to look at it and appreciate it and not have such a complicated life. So in all of these examples, what I'm trying to show is what I think are very eloquent, articulate portrayals of artisans' lives today and examples of living traditions and cultural heritage. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Judy Freita. That was amazing. It's such a valid point that how traditional craft is different from industry, and what are the meanings that motifs have. Very true. You spoke about the Kutch traditions, and when we look at any other part of the country, whether it's Punjab for Fulkari or anywhere else, we find that when it is a traditional craft, and there are many crafts handed over from mother to daughter, they're very different from what the industry does to it. And similarly, in the South, where there's kalamkari, there were lotuses for India. And when they started sending them abroad, the lotuses shifted to tulips. So of course, motifs have a meaning and how different it is when it is done for traditional reasons and traditions evolve and living traditions. I think that was a wonderful talk. Thank you so much for being on the panel and for giving us your valuable views. And we'll take the question answers towards the end. So if any members from the audience would like to ask questions, you can sort of type them and we can take it later. Thank you so much. That was really a wonderful session. Moving on with the program, I would now introduce Dr. Kevin Murray. Dr. Kevin Murray is the Senior Vice President of the World's Crafts Council of Asia. He's an independent writer and curator. And for the past 8 years, he's been the director of Craft Victoria, where he initiated a number of programs, including the Melbourne Scarf Festival and the South Project, which was a 4-year program of cultural exchanges across the South that involved international gatherings in Melbourne, Washington, Santiago, and Johannesburg. With a PhD in the field of narrative psychology, he has an ongoing interest in art as a way of telling stories. We welcome you, Dr. Murray, to please give your presentation and to put your views forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta. And what an act to follow, Judy Ben. What beautiful works, quite astounding. I was particularly struck by the work of Tulsi Ben, the collaboration with Oaxaca. I must follow that up. And Dr. Gupta, wonderful to see you. We've had your views aired in Garland magazine, thanks to our friend Ashok Chatterjee. And I'm pleased to continue this dialogue and also to be part of an event of the Centre for Soft Power. I've been following these events that have been happening recently, and they've been extraordinarily interesting. And so it's a great honor to be part of that. In thinking about motifs, I wanted to go back to 2011, 10 years ago, a world before COVID had even been thought of. And it really was the beginning of the journey of Garland magazine. In Delhi, there was an event called Abushan. It was the brainchild of Ms. Usha Krishna, who was then president of the World Crafts Council. It was a celebration of adornment. Nowhere in the world could you imagine the scene in Delhi with dignitaries, ministers, the world's press all gathered to talk and to celebrate adornment within Indian culture and the world. And it was at that time that Ms. Usha Krishna decided to put together an exhibition of jewelry from around the world and discuss with me the motif that would be the identity for the Asia-Pacific region. The Asia-Pacific region is the largest region, as you can imagine, in the World Crafts Council. So we considered this carefully and realized that it wasn't necessarily a typical piece of adornment like a necklace or a ring or a crown. It was a kind of adornment that is relatively ephemeral, the garland. The garland as a thread on which we put natural materials, often flowers, which we string and place on people and objects that we consider to be special, either as guests or as idols. It's a ritual, a very important ritual, and it's the kind of thing that draws so many people to Indian culture because of the way in which it marks an occasion in a unique way. The same as a foreigner involved in conferences or events, the felicitation when speakers are wrapped in a beautiful cloth. This is quite unique and different, but it also isn't something that fits within our understanding of culture, which is often associated with products, commodities that are bought and sold. So 6 years ago, I began Garland magazine as a journey to think about the kinds of stories behind the objects we make across the wider world, with Garland as the key motif. And so if I can just share the screen, just to give you a little glimpse of that. This is from our Garden of Stories. We've, over the last 6 years, gathered 1,400 stories from roughly 600 writers in 67 countries, which is really a wonderful way of showing that the richness of what's being made today, and particularly what you might call the craft renaissance, the revival of traditional artifacts that is so key to the creative energy, particularly in the wider world. I'm thinking beyond the West to countries in our hemisphere. I include Australia in our hemisphere, in the Eastern Hemisphere, as well as the South and so on, which is partly a response of recovering what was lost during the colonial period when we abandoned so much traditional culture for modernity. So with the Garden of Stories, which is a way of navigating through this richness, one of the paths we have is the garland. And as you can see, it's a ubiquitous symbol. It's evident in Eastern European, in contemporary jewelry, in the Pacific, of course, with the lei, in the classical period, in Roman and Greek cultures, and also, of course, in the West, with the way the laurel has been used to symbolize victory, and many of the folk crafts of the West, which involve dancers wearing these floral crowns. So this particular item has been such a rich motif for us in representing something which connects people together across these many different cultures. But I just wanted to briefly talk about a program that's evolved quite recently related to this, and which is something about a path ahead. And it's going back to Kutch, so something that Judy Ben would be familiar with. One of the challenges we've faced is to think about how artisans respond to the pandemic when so much of their business had been tied to or sales in shops, and how it is that we can provide them with a means of staying connected with the world. So with our friend Lokesh Guy, we've been doing a series of story making workshops where we invite people to listen to a professional storyteller, Gore Raja, an Indian woman, who's paired with a traditional artisan, and she elaborates often enchanting fairy tale, which relates to their work. And in this case, the last one we had which was a series around the firebird, the Russian myth. We had Govind Bai, who was a block carver, and block carving, as you can imagine, is a quite incredible craft, the basis behind so much of the Ajrak and other block printing textile crafts in India. So we got to see him produce one of these blocks, and he shared with us one that he was making at the moment. And like the garland, this particular form, no doubt familiar to us, expresses itself in many different cultures. The block printer called this the keri, which I think is a reference to mango seed. And many people see its origin in Persian culture with the bote, which is the idea of the cypress that bends in the wind, which was an ancient Zoroastrian symbol for strength and endurance. And of course, in the West, we know of this as the Paisley, due to the way in which a textile mill in Scotland appropriated much of the designs from India, and it became very fashionable during the arts and crafts movement. So this is a motif that we'll be using for our next issue, which is about the relationship between East and West. For our issues now, we developed them organically with help of a series of pathfinders, we call them, who meet 4 times in a forum like this to share stories and understandings about a particular division in our world and how it is that we might connect those 2 halves. Many of these people from India, and I'm pleased, even though I'm far from India at the moment in Melbourne, that we work here with the large Indian diaspora. India represents the largest source of migrants to Melbourne, so we have a very strong culture here, particularly amongst students. And we look to how we can link East and West without denying their difference, without assuming that there isn't that kind of difference. And we eventually selected on this particular motif as being something like a natural force that is expressed in different cultures in different ways, that may have had its seed in Persian culture and different emanations in other cultures, and is something which we share as an appreciation of the force and resilience of nature. We certainly need that resilience now. So this particular issue will coincide with a very exciting event in Perth on the other side of the Indian Ocean. In fact, it is called the Indian Ocean Craft Triennial. It's the first of what will hopefully be a series of events that will make the Indian Ocean perhaps a little smaller and connect our cultures so much more closely together. We've heard a lot about the Asia Pacific as a sphere of interest, particularly with East Asia, countries like Japan and China. But the Indian Ocean, of course, has a charmed and marvelous history, particularly in its pre-colonial era, when so many different cultures connected through the trade that was occurring. So it's a time for cultures of Africa, the Middle East, from South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Australia to come together. So this issue will coincide with that. And I think while so many of us have been separated during these very dark times of the COVID pandemic, like the cypress tree, we're resilient and we will keep coming back. And we draw on these motifs and the inheritance of our ancestors who inscribed them into our culture for strength. And I'm very appreciative of being able to learn from India and to share that particular energy. So thank you, and I look forward to discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Murray. I think that resilience is amazing that the people have. And the reference of the Paisley, the Bhuta, we also call it almond in some parts of this country, and also kalka or the mango being a resilient motif. I never thought of it that way, but I think that's so wonderful. And also the idea to make the Indian Ocean smaller. It would be so wonderful to be able to participate in the Indian Ocean Craft Triennial and to see what's happening across the world. In these days of pluralism, where people are sort of getting back to their roots and trying to understand that there are ways more than one, and after colonization, that is not the only way of life. I think it's very, very important about the things that you've mentioned, especially calling the journal Garland a string of flowers that is very relevant in every part of the world, and to link it to storytelling. And I think storytelling is such a powerful craft. The Indian narratives are very, very powerful. And we see that this craft not only is not only about telling stories, it includes also the audiovisual aids that are created along with it, which we see our craftspeople doing. So thank you so much for that wonderful insight into storytelling and Paisley and motifs. And of course, to force us to think beyond, the Northern Hemisphere. So thank you so much. Thank you for the wonderful lecture. Thank you. Taking the session forward, I now invite Mrs. Shanti Chandrasekhar, who's a kolam artist and a painter of Thanjavur paintings. She's a Maryland artist who's been drawing and painting since early childhood. Her interest in understanding different media has led her to experiment with sculpture, photography, printmaking, and papermaking. She's also been trained in the traditional art forms of kolam and Tanjore style paintings. While many of her works are influenced by her Indian heritage, her true inspiration comes from the mystery and majesty of the world around her. Her muse lives where the scientific overlaps with the spiritual, and that's truly amazing. Shanti's works have been displayed in a variety of locations in the US and India. She won the Maryland State Council Independent Artist Award in 2021 and Individual Artist Awards in 2013 and 2016 for her workshops on paper. With that, I request Srimati Shanti Chandrasekhar to please talk about her experiences, and we can see the lovely kolam paintings behind her. So I invite you, ma'am, to please talk about your journey. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we start the slideshow, please? So, Vanakkam. Many thanks to the Center for Soft Power for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I am very honored to be here among all of these great speakers, and I hope to do some kind of justice with that. Thank you all for this wonderful presentations. I will be talking about a few different traditional Indian art forms that I use in my artwork. But today I'll be focusing mostly on columns and Tanjavur paintings. Kolam is a daily ritual among Tamil women. Every morning at sunrise and sometimes at sunset, they clear the front of the house and draw a pattern of dots and lines using rice and rock powder as a symbol of welcome and also a way to bring positive energy into the household. On special occasions, columns are drawn with a small piece of cotton cloth soaked in rice that is ground with water. It is an ancient tradition that has been handed down from generation to generation. So columns are aesthetically beautiful as there is balance, harmony, and symmetry in them. The dots and lines are done freehand without the use of any measuring tools. The dots are laid down first in a square or isometric grids. So the isometric grids will give you the hexagons or equilateral triangles in the columns. And in Sikha column, the line weaves around the dots to create one or more closed loops. And in some Pulli columns, the dots are connected by the lines to create a closed space. And in Padi columns, there are only lines and no dots. Columns could be simple or complex, and sometimes include images like flowers, leaves, conches, and during the special month of Margali, that is mid-December to January, there are special columns that are made during that season. Like every morning, very early in the morning, you would see these columns with cow dung in the center and flower in the center. So this was something that I grew up looking at. And there are even column competitions during Pongal. And this gives an opportunity to showcase one's talents. Traditional kolam is an eco-friendly art form, and as it is created using natural materials. The rice powder serves as food for birds and insects, thus feeding 1,000 souls. So what comes from earth goes back to earth. The painting on the left with, I think the slide has to change now, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. So the painting on the left, the one with the squares, so the center, there is a single line column that depicts the delicate balance between sustainability and overuse. And like the cracks around, this is maybe like a portrait of the earth. And the dark space that you see is like women's faces there. That's not very clear in this, but it shows the connection. Columns are also steeped with philosophy and life lessons. The dots are said to represent challenges in life, and if one can weave their way around them and get back to the starting point while still maintaining some kind of symmetry, they would be able to deal with life's ups and downs. So in the painting next to it, the stark black dots in the artwork. I'm sorry, the previous slide, please. So the previous slide, you could see the dark black dots. So in that artwork, the black dots represent challenges. And that is so much more stark and visible. But with the white lines around these, weaving around these dots, they depict the inner strength that is not always as visible. And we can move to the next slide, please. Columns serve as a reminder of impermanence and non-attachment, teaching us to let go. A column lasts only a few hours, maybe a few days before it gets erased. And since columns are made freehand and mostly from memory, mistakes are bound to happen. And the good thing I found was that the columns last only a short period, and that gives us the opportunity to improve. Columns are also drawn by bending down at the hips rather than kneeling or squatting on the floor, helping both the mind and the body to be flexible. So moving on to another aspect of columns, the mathematical aspect. So columns demonstrate permutations and combinations of a few key shapes. Like a quarter of a circle and a quarter of a square can combine to create the 6 basic shapes. And these shapes can in turn connect to form different columns. There are some implicit rules that columns tend to follow. Each of these 6 shapes can connect with other shapes only where there is a square corner. And columns usually have at least one symmetry. Either it could be reflection, rotation, and translation, or it could be all. Columns symbolize infinity, as the closed loops create never-ending paths. These paths are very similar to Euler's circuits or the Postman problem, in which a path is traced only once. And columns can also be fractals, like a simple pattern can be repeated to create a larger and a more complex column while still retaining its original shape. And researchers and scholars have been studying columns in terms of knot theory or graph and network theories, among others. Column captures the essence of the cosmos, a small portion of something much larger, and also the cycle of creation and dissolution. To me, the dots and lines represent the particle and wave nature of light. They also remind me of the shapes of orbitals in an atom. I found some column patterns that reminded me of the shapes of glial cells found in the brain, and these cells support the neurons. And so I replaced the column dots with the nucleus of those cells in the drawings. I think we have to, the slideshow isn't moving forward. So I'm sorry, going back, this is the one with the quarter of a circle and a quarter of a square. This was about the impermanence. This painting depicts impermanence. And then if you move forward with the slides, please. Yeah, and this is about the fractal nature and the repetition and symmetry, where like the artwork represents sun and earth. This is an extension of the column. So I've expanded a small column to make it much larger. Yeah, so, and the next slide, please. Yeah, so in this one, you can actually see the glial cells. So each of these 3 column ones, the dots are actually the nucleus of the glial cells. So if you actually look at the larger picture, you can actually see the glial cells in the background. Another area that I hope to get to is cymatics, which is like, where vibrating particles create patterns depending on frequencies, and these patterns look like columns. So now we move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Recently, I was involved with the 2021 column project, which was organized by Rupal Shah and Soumya Somnath. I designed the column concept, and we collected tiles designed by people ranging in age from 5 to 95 from around the country, including like DC public schools, a childcare center, a correctional facility. With the help of family, friends, and volunteers, we assembled a 1,950 tile column installation in front of the Capitol building in Washington, DC. This project was also included in the 2021 presidential inauguration kickoff. So now we move on to the next set of slides on Tanjore painting. So the next, so this form, Tanjore painting, or Palagai Padam, as it is called in Tamil, flourished from around the 16th century under the Vijayanagara, Maratha, and Nayaka influences. So originally the board used to be made of teak wood and jackfruit wood, and it would be covered with cotton cloth and then coated with a paste made of chalk powder, Arabic gum, and powdered tamarind seeds. These days, it's mostly plywood that's used. So then the image is drawn on the board, and then either semi-precious stones or the Jaipur stones are glued onto them. And these often are glued where like that depict areas that depict the jewelry, clothing, or ornate architecture. And these stones are then secured by makku, which is a paste, again made of chalk powder, Arabic gum, and some other binders, which sometimes is a secret, a family secret. So after it dries, the makku, that relief area is covered with gold paper. Then the artist would complete the actual painting, which originally used to be made with natural materials, but these days it's mostly poster colors. The gold work with the semi-precious stones, as well as the intricate painting, brings out the richness of the art form. So now we're going to move to the next set of slides. I'm going to talk about a series that I called Samadhana, in which I've included Tanjavur style painting along with kalamkari and images of sculptures. The Samadhana is the Sanskrit word that means reconciliation or uniting various ideas. And I've tried to unite ancient Indian cosmology and current scientific cosmology through the medium of traditional art and geometric abstraction. So in this particular two paintings, I've used the kalamkari motifs to represent Brahma and Saraswati as time and information, as this art form involves like a sequential and ordered process in its making. The lotus, again, we talk about lotus, which is a common motif in various Indian art forms. It usually represents purity, but it's also associated with time. In the Brahma painting, you can actually see the spiraling stalk of the lotus. And to me, the spiral represents time, the passage of time, and in my artistic vocabulary. And in the Saraswati painting, the radiating sinusoidal curves that are found by the concentric lotus petal patterns, that represents knowledge or information. Moving on to the next slide. So since like most of the images that you see in Tanjavur paintings, it's usually Vishnu and Lakshmi. So I decided to use this style with the background representing space-time and fields using acrylic paint and Jaipur stones. So in this case, I used local materials and the Jaipur stones to sort of to work on the Tanjavur style painting. This work is on canvas, so that's the way I could work. Based on the descriptions of like various Indian texts, I noticed that both space and time were often associated with Vishnu, as he brings order whenever and wherever chaos begins to rule. And I was inspired by verses from the Bhagavad Gita that described how everything ultimately flows into the Vishwarupam form of Vishnu and attains moksha, which is sort of very similar to the concept of a black hole where, when light enters it, it cannot escape the black hole's extreme gravity. And, it just felt like, it was that one-way direction, as with the Vishwarupam form too. So the Dashavataram, in the circular format, symbolizes the event horizon beyond which is the point of no return. Lakshmi, on the other side, represents wealth and well-being, which I have connected to the fields, the word kshetra that repeats in a lot of different verses, fields of influence and action that we exist within. I have depicted the 8 forms of Ashtalakshmi, each surrounded by a series of overlapping concentric circles to denote fields. So we move on to the next slides. The slide. Shiva and Durga represent space and energy, and I've used images of Chola bronzes to represent them. The process of creating sculptures inherently involves the manipulation of space and energy. Nataraja's dance symbolizes the cycles of the cosmos, and every part of the classic Nataraja sculpture has deeper connotations. The Durga painting was inspired by both verses from Lalita Sahasranamam and the scientific description of energy. The 6-point star motif in the background, which is like pretty common in a lot of Indian art forms, that is made with varied lines, like broken lines, some of them are solid, some places there's no lines, describes the visible and invisible nature of energy. So the word Sanatana means eternal, or that which is beginningless and endless. And the kolam, with its never-ending loop, symbolizes that in an abstract way, while the Tanjavur paintings symbolizes the same, but with images that are more relatable. So my work is an exploration of the cosmos and our place in it. And motifs from traditional Indian art both help me express my ideas and constantly inspire me to continue exploring these mysteries. Thank you.
Wow. I mean, I'm super impressed, and there is so much to learn in this world. Srimati Shanti Chandrasekhar, your talk, your slides, and the entire thing of spirituality and Sanskrit and represented in these paintings and kolam. Kolam is such a meditative exercise. As a child, I've lived in Hyderabad and have drawn, many of these on the floor, and I can do it with my eyes closed. But to think of it as a unit, of the universe, and to sort of do the kind of analysis that you've done, I think it's so brilliant. I have goosebumps. It's like it reminds me of something that I used to say very often as a child: Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityorma Mritam Gamaya. So I think this was Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, taking me from darkness to light. Beautiful, amazing. How these two paintings you have, the Tanjavur paintings that you have interpreted from the basic representations to such a lot of meaning behind them, with Shakti and Shiv, Brahma, Saraswati. I think other than, of course, Lakshmi and Vishnu, which usually who are the deities usually represented, and to have taken an art form like kolam to a level where everybody is standing around it, and so much research on that. I really bow down to you for this lovely presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we will take the question answers. I can see questions already coming in, but we will take the question answers after our last presentation. So with that, thank you so much, Srimati Chandrasekhar.
Thank you.
And moving on, I invite now Mrs. Malvika Shivkumar for her presentation. She's the co-founder of Vastrakala. Malvika studied English and French literature, and after a stint with an NGO, co-founded Vastrakala 25 years ago. Since then, her company has been involved in projects which maintain the highest standards of craftsmanship. Notably, the work with museums and public institutions has provided opportunities to study historical embroidery and enabled their preservation, and often their recreation. It is based on this heritage that today Vastrakala's collaborations with the world's leading designers has produced outstanding works that contribute to the language of contemporary decorative arts. Mrs. Malvika Shivkumar, I request you to please join in. Yes, thank you so much. And I welcome you to please talk about your journey and your field. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tulika ji. I'd like to first thank the Center for Soft Power, Vijay Lakshmi ji and Aparna, for inviting me here today. What a wonderful presentation. It's early in the morning here on the Coromandel coast, and I'm awakening to these wonderful insights from across the globe. I'd like to first start with a little presentation on our company. As you mentioned, we're a 25-year-old company, an Indo-French company based in Chennai that designs and produces the highest quality custom-made hand embroidery, which is both classical and contemporary, and which we use to embellish both interiors as well as fashion. In this role, we are often asked to reinterpret different textile traditions, whether it's weaving or printing, and this enables our craft to be relevant to the present. So today I would like to present 3 classical motifs used in Indian ornamentation and our interpretation of them through embroidery. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit clumsy at this. So I'd like to start the first example with the Tree of Life. This was an embroidery that was inspired by an 18th century Palampur with the Tree of Life as its motif and theme. Many of you, of course, know that these textiles were greatly prized when they were printed in India for the quality of their print on cotton fabrics, which at that point was a technique that was, unknown and even unrivaled at the time in the West. They did not have the technology of print, and cotton itself was much less used. These textiles were very widely traded by the colonial powers and enriched, of course, the coffers of their various trading companies. This embroidery here was commissioned by an architect as a curtain panel for their client's master bedroom. And it's interesting to me that when they were originally printed, they served the same purpose as in interior furnishing and adorned, the home much in the same way as we are doing today. We kept the scale and composition of the original to emphasize, these very fanciful flowers and motifs and blooms, to give it this sense of, movement, being very dynamic, bursting forth, the energy that it also, brings with it, which was very much typical also of the original, printed chintzes, which were also from the same Coromandel coast. And that was then made for, the Dutch or the English markets, and also exported and traded to the Asian markets in the East. Just going to zoom in to show you the details. What's interesting also is to point out is that, like the blocks that were used in printing, where one block was used for each color, so also in embroidery, zones are marked out on the drawing. Or the artwork, and a legend is provided with specific colors for each area. I'm just trying to zoom in for you to get the details that show up much like blocks that were carved. And we also provided, we treated each of these motifs much like the printed ancestor, which is to say that we used embroidery techniques that were relatively flat stitches. Nothing was raised, nothing stood out. And these techniques emphasized also the overlaying of colors, and in some cases even imitate the passage of time on fabric, making it appear faded in parts when you were to see it from afar. The second motif that I have selected for today's presentation is the Paisley. A few years ago, this is a model that I'm showing you. A few years ago, we were entrusted by an Italian decorator with a project for what they called an Indian room in a London townhouse. It's quite fascinating also to see the place, that Indian ornamentation and decoration takes even today anywhere in the world. In this entire room, from this tapestried walls, you can see, and also, the window treatment that you see a little bit on the left side. And when it eventually had furniture that was upholstered, all of it was to be embellished with embroidery. And the principal motif of this specially fabricated block printed fabric was, as Dr. Murray said, what is now come to be known as the Paisley. I'm showing you here one such panel when it was completed. As with, any motif in the decorative arts, the origins have been blurred along these transcontinental trade routes. And, one can trace this back, the butte, to the, Persian roots. And then it saw its apotheosis in the woven Kashmirs of the Mughal period, or even the unripe mango, the kerry form from India, which made the fortunes of the East Indian companies and led to its mass reproductions in what became, in this famous Scottish town of Paisley. Embroidered in gold soft wire and gold metallic sequins, metallic beads, the idea was to just catch the shadow and glow of the motifs, playing with the light, through the different, throughout the day. So these would just catch the ray of light in that entire room. And depending on how where you were seated, it was showing in a different way. What was also important here for us was to find, in this particular project, was to find the balance between the richness of both these crafts, both the block printing made here in Machilipatnam, as much as the embroidery. And which meant that, we were very careful not to overwhelm the print by covering it, completely submerging it in embroidery. The borders also separating this, body from the top and the bottom also had an interlaced butte, which we just outlined. You can see here just the little hints of the gold sequins and soft wires that were used to just bring out a few parts of the interior of the butte. It's also interesting to note that we, in adopting techniques, try to use and try to be as authentic as possible, which means that we use what could have been used and would have been used at the point in time when these were originally made. Yeah, there you see also clearer, same techniques of using the sequins and then having the little cuts of both soft wire and the beads. So, which is, of course, the kerry is a grand classic. And I really love its versatility, which allows so many interpretations across, different crafts, as we've seen also in today's presentation. And I find it, universally appealing. And in each craft, it, retains the local flavor. Moving on, for the final presentation, this is a project where we are going to show you several floral motifs. This is, an example of one of the most prestigious projects our company has had to design and execute, which was for the banquet hall of the Rashtrapati Bhavan. After many months of intense exchange and ideating on, how should this space be suitably decorated, our proposal for this room, for this banquet hall, was retained. Given the limited time here for this presentation, I will just summarize by saying that the brief given to us was to design decorative elements that would be appropriate to the setting. It is, after all, the presidential palace. And of course, to translate them into the language of embroidery. And for this, we chose, the Zari Zardozi techniques with the gold thread that was specially made in Surat, and which, in fact, we had 3 times to go back to find exactly and make exactly the right and the perfect shade of gold as was requested of us. The building itself, gave us clues to other monuments that inspired the original architects. And we turned to the ornamental motifs of the Taj Mahal, the uncut flowers emerging from the mounds of earth. Here you can see them depicting the delicate forms of the lily, the narcissus, iris, and tulip. The challenge for us was also, one of size and scale. The height of the room meant that the work had to be visible to the guests who were seated and dining below. I'm showing you how here, from the stage of drawing for the different layers, we move on to seeing how the techniques that we used, which is couching and molding and layering, renders this final 3D sort of effect, as you can see here captured in the national emblem. In total, there were 22 panels that covered these upward friezes above the lintel. And no 2 panels had the same flower motifs. Our team of artists drew up the motifs painstakingly, ensuring that they kind of captured this very naturalistic treatment of the original marble panels, or even some of it was even inspired. Some of these blooms were inspired by the rich textiles, velvet, in velvet. This is to just show you a sense of looking at the artwork. I like also very much going back to what was said earlier, that, it is very meditative, and it's a craft and the repeated gesture. It's very true that when you are sitting in this large space with our craftsmen and women, there is very much that sense of meditation, meditative quality that permeates. So more than 75 craftsmen worked on this monumental project. You can see here how, you can see this 3D effect in this photograph, how it's molded. You can see the pride that kind of leaps off their faces, knowing where their work was going to go to. And that kind of restored the belief that craft and its practitioners can find a future in the 21st century. Once again, you see here an important detail in a close-up are the little shadow lines that, in fact, are what gives it that 3D effect. So that when viewed from a distance, they stand out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Malvika ji. That was an amazing presentation where we got to see now the designing aspect for the modern time period. I would request all our 4 speakers to kindly illuminate their cameras so we can see everyone. I mean, from the traditional craft versus craft industry to storytelling to kolam and Tanjavur paintings, and now to the modern recreations of traditional craft for interiors. We've had a wide spectrum of talks. Now I would request if anybody has any questions to kindly share it with us. I have 2 here, and I'll start with these. So the first question is, what link Kalamkari has had with the lotus? Okay, so that's a question posed to me. Thank you for asking this question, Dr. Vidyanath Jha. My research has been on the lotus as a postgraduate student, and lotus has nothing to do with any particular textile in the country, but lotus as such has a deeper meaning. It has a meaning of transcendence, of purity, of continuity. And a lot of researchers have worked in this area who belong to art history. And it is a flower primarily because of purity. It has been used in multiple sort of areas across the world, not only in India. It's been used in Egypt. It's a motif used in Buddhism, in China a lot. So Kalamkari, because the stories were of Indian, mythology, etc. Thus, this came about, and the lotus was used over there. When I said it changed to tulips, it was because things were commissioned from across the globe, done in style of Kalamkari, but not the essence of Kalamkari, the way it was supposed to be. And that's how it changed. It became an industry for somebody else. So that was the reason why I spoke about that. I hope that answers your question. Moving on to another question. Are there regional differences in the representation of motifs across India? For example, Paisley in northern region versus an eastern region. Do these differences have any deeper meaning? The question is for Dr. Marie. Can I request you kindly to share your thoughts around this?
I think I'm certainly not the expert here in terms of regional differences in India, and I welcome other esteemed guests to comment on that. But one thing that I would like to say, just to put a hold on that question, is the reference to these motifs in other countries. Like we saw the magnificent work in France, translating styles from India in ways which are very fine, the couching, the velvet, in a way very French, but at the same time distinctly Indian. And these days, we're very conscious of things like intellectual property and appropriation. And what for foreigners seems to be characteristic of India is a kind of almost an open source model that basically there is no bar on what you can take of Indian culture, a bit like in the same way there's the generosity with generic medicines in big pharma in India, which I think is an inspiration for the world. But in Australia, for instance, our Aboriginal motifs very strict controls over who has authority to use them. But in that sense, we've often come across quite complex discussions and collaborations between Australian Aboriginal and Indians about who has the right to use these particular. But I think that's one takeaway potentially from this is about a bit like the Garland, it's a welcoming to the world, this richness of motif that we should all feel very generous and very thankful for receiving. But in terms of regional differences within India, I leave it to my esteemed colleagues to respond to that.
So I used to teach Indian art to local, like Indian second generation, third generation students. And when I talked about lotus, they had no idea what it was. So then you go back and then you start researching. And I would work with Madhubani style or Kalamkari style and, the lotus in the Tanjore painting. Or there are those subtle differences. And I wonder if it is because of the local materials that were available. Even if you take kolam, every state has its own form of kolam with different names. It's just not called kolam. And it's done slightly differently, like Alpona, where you use your fingers, like your palms, or you use a brush in Mandana. And, it's just different there. And I think it's the local materials. And I sometimes wonder when all of these line drawings originated, that we all have a similar, starting point, and it evolves based on the different locations. Like I've looked at Saura artwork and Worli artwork. There are those similarities of triangular bodies. Those triangle shapes repeat, but then Saura takes it slightly different after a certain point, and Worli is different. Bill and Gone are similar, and yet they are not. You can make out the difference. And it's the subtlety that I think, gives it that flavor in individual communities' flavor. And I think it's just because of that. It's one of my ways of thinking of it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I hope that answers the question. So as of now, we do not have any other questions, and we have only about 5 minutes left for the session. But if anybody has any question, I would again, okay, so we have another one here. Many of the motifs discussed here have historic roots. Are there any newer motifs that are becoming trends to look out for in the future? Yes, there are graphics. I would leave it open to our esteemed guests to please talk about it. And would also request Srimati Malvika Shivkumar, as she was talking about the latest work being done, if she could shed some light, or any of the panelists, please.
I'm not sure that, in what we do, we are so concerned about trends. I think that, something that is timeless, you see that, they come back. It's a matter of interpretation. And in the language of embroidery, in what we do, it would be defined very much by its usage. It would be defined very much by, also the period that it's supposed to represent. That is what I was referring to earlier when I said that in what we do, for us, it's very important to have this authenticity, which means that we are not going to use something that is absolutely not, would not have been used at that historical time. So which means that you're not going to be trendy and therefore use something that is, maybe made today with a material that's, and sadly, in fact, there's a lot of usage of plastic, etc., etc. So we are not very much into
latest trends that way.
latest
Yes, of course. But I think here, if we look at the motifs that are trending today, have a lot to do with caricature. They have a lot to do. It has nothing to do with crafts, but it has something to do with the superhero system, with a lot of different kinds of caricatures. And also, I mean, you look at graffiti, you look at different things. This is what is evolving. And maybe 50 years or 60 years or even 100 years down the line, people will talk about these things, this time period, and that Spider-Man was a popular motif, for example. I can't say anything right now, but it's quite possible that these things may pick up later.
Well, in that sense, yes. I mean, we did, for example, use, even though it became trendy again in our times of having tattoos, right? And we recreated what would have been individual tattoos that people used in modern times, which became a theme for embroidered shoes that we made in collaboration with Christian Louboutin. So I bring that because it's a very famous and well-known name, and there's this sort of everybody wants to have that kind of a red sole shoe. But for us, what was interesting was also, and this was an idea that Jean-François brought up, to use these tattoos and interpret it in modern embroidered language.
Right, thank you so much. Thank you, and that has truly been a wonderful session. Can I request Ms. Arunima Gupta to kindly take over from here? Thank you. Because I'm not sure how long do we continue. Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tulika, for orchestrating a lovely session. And we thank all the panelists for joining us from all over the world and sharing their not just a presentation, but what has clearly been an investment of their life, energy, time, several decades of passion, and it just shines through this 1 hour of that we got to listen. Shri Vinay Sahasrabuddheji, the president of ICCR, in one of his talks to CSP, mentioned that what is unique about India, he was talking in the context of architecture. And he says, when you go to countries outside India, you see a great uniformity in how they have imitated the West. You see a lot of development, you see big buildings, you see big bridges, you see skyscrapers, all looking very awe-inspiring, but they look this. So you don't know whether you're in America or whether you're in China or you're in Israel or you're in Europe, especially in the modernization of urban cities. I think we could extrapolate that to what our speakers said, to art, craft, and textiles. And India still has a Lajpat Nagar. India still has the small bylanes in Chennai. India still has Kutch, where they may be struggling, but we still are holding on to a very distinct identity. Thank you so much for this session, and we thank all our speakers for joining us today. We hope to have you again in course of time, guiding us to managing and promoting Indian soft power in this area. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now have our next session, which is on sports. I request our director, Srimati Vijay Lakshmiji, to give her opening remarks, and then I will speak.
Yeah, namaskar and welcome to this second session on sports, and it talks about finding our inner strength and reaching our goals with extreme energy. Play, outdoor or indoor, has always been very inherent to our society. What kind of looks different from other countries is most of the sports that have originated in India hardly need anything other than your own power, whether it's kabaddi or it's kho-kho or it's, gilli dandal. You use very little and you take very little from nature. You don't really need to spend a whole lot on any of this. And most of our board games have been very value centered and, where you either went, like, for example, the snakes and ladders, which was called Paramapada Shopanapadam in the South. Everything was a value. Unknowingly, you started absorbing value systems. And, so we felt that when we say sports, everybody thinks it's only the field sport. So we thought we should also talk about the board games. So today we have, both. And we also thought we should have Kalaripayar too, because that's an ancient form of not only physical training, but if we have to call it a sport, a martial art. And so it's really nice that Christine and Sumit Sinha have accepted to be a part of this panel. And we also have Adam Phillips, and we have Oria, who's sent us a recording. And, I welcome you all to this session, and I'm sure we'll all find different ways of inventing our own games, which include our heritage and culture. So over to you, Aparna, to take it forward.
Thank you. We were hoping to get a sportsman or a sports manager to just give a recap about India's sports diplomacy. But given their busyness with the Olympics and now the Paralympics, I will just have to do it. I'll just give you a short background on India's sports diplomacy potential. The Indian government has made improving sports outcomes a strategic priority, as we saw during the Olympics. And greater sports participation is critical to the future health and productivity of India's large population. There is a driving demand for better sports facilities, systems, and inputs. And the demand for sports training, sports goods, and sponsorship money is also growing thanks to India's burgeoning consumer class. Sports also signals values and capabilities. For instance, Australia believes that in collaborations with India, sports people achieve celebrity status and promote positive image of Australia. Sports diplomacy is a vehicle for advocacy for Australia on gender equality, women's empowerment, and disability inclusion, and for engaging Australia's Indian diaspora. Genuine commercial opportunities are also emerging in India for service providers from all over the world. There is an increasing appetite in India's education sector for sports training and expertise, as well as pockets of demand for sports event management, cooperation, high-performance technologies, and sports medicine. The recent Tokyo Olympics was India's most successful campaign in its Olympic history. The country returned with a total of 7 medals, including an individual gold medal for Neeraj Chopra in javelin throw. While all of these 7 medals came in different sports, there is one very unique feature that links all of them except for one athlete. 6 of the 7 Indian medal-winning individuals or teams had foreign coaches, with the only exception being our weightlifter Mirabai Chanu. While the country's only second individual Olympic gold medalist, Neeraj Chopra, trained under the German Klaus Bartonitz, the men's hockey team was coached by the Australian Graham Reed. Boxer Lovlina Borgohen was under the aegis of Italian Rafael Bergamsco, and wrestler Ravikumar Dahiya blossomed with the Russian Kamal Malika over his side. Badminton star P.V. Sindhu worked with Park Tae-sung of South Korea, and Bajrang Punia clinched the bronze under the guidance of Georgia's Shako Benitez. 2 others, the Indians hockey women team, which almost got the bronze, and wrestler Deepak Punia, who came close to a medal, also had foreign coaches. The Indian shooting contingent too worked with foreign coaches Pavel Smirnov and Oleg Mikhailov in the lead up to the games. The Indian Premier League from the world of cricket has also shown us how exciting it is to have sports people from different nationalities compete together, bringing in new learning in training and culture. New segments of the market have emerged in the sports sector and have gained momentum in India over the past decade. Rising trends in participation and consumption of sport are likely to drive their continued growth out to 2035. And there were news reports that India may bid to host the 2036 Olympics. The recreational sports market will keep expanding on the back of positive trends such as focus on healthy lifestyles, a growing middle class with higher disposable incomes, and increased internet penetration. Indian sports goods industry, including apparel, equipment, and footwear, will continue to grow, have already risen from $2.7 billion in 2013 to $4.8 billion in 2015. The key export markets for India include United Kingdom, United States, UAE, Australia, South Africa, and Germany. Indian sports goods have also been exported for rollout at global sporting events. Both inbound and outbound sports tourism will increase, and India has hosted several mega sporting events that have attracted tourists and sports enthusiasts. A growing number of tour operators and agents are specializing in servicing the requirements of this tourist segment. Greater affluence in India's consumer class will see more outbound tourists, including those attracted to international sporting events being held in India. With this short summary, we would now play for you a short video. But before that, I will just introduce our panelists for today. We will play a short video by Mr. Boria Majumdar. He is a columnist for India Today, sports journalist, and he apologized for not being able to be here today as he's covering the Paralympics now being held in Tokyo. He also covered the Olympics for India Today. He is a leading sports scholar and television commentator. He's the author of a number of best-selling books on Indian sport. He's an op-ed columnist for the Times of India and sports expert at Times Now Television. He's a Rhodes Scholar and is adjunct professor at Monash University and a senior research fellow at the University of Central Lancashire. Coming to traditional Indian board games, we have Ms. Christina, and she's a serial entrepreneur with 17 plus years of experience in product development and consulting. She's a passionate board gamer, art and design lover. She advocates for locally made products. With her is her colleague, Mr. Sumit Sinha. He's a game designer based in India and is a serial entrepreneur with a multi-million exit. I'm not very sure what that means, but he has 15 plus years of experience in tech, sales, and consulting. He's a passionate board gamer. We have also Mr. Adam Phillips, and we are all very keenly looking forward to his session. He is the director of Kalari Lab and senior instructor of Kerala's Kalari Payattu Academy. He's a physiotherapist and Marma specialist. And we all know that to be a Kalari expert, you have to be an expert in many, many fields. He has been practicing Kalari for almost 20 years, first encountering the practice as an actor in training. In 2001, he visited India and became a student of Gurukul Sharif at Kerala Kalari Payattu Academy in Kerala. Since then, he has become a senior teacher of the school and is now one of the most experienced non-Indian practitioners of the art, leading workshops in UK, Poland, Serbia, Czechoslovakia, Russia, Greece, and Italy. Alongside his practice of Kalari Payattu and the healing art Kalari Chikitsa, he has trained as both an actor and physiotherapy and has used Kalari in both disciplines to gain deeper understanding of the psyche-physical process involved in body conditioning and re-education. In 2016, he moved to Thailand and founded Kalari Lab on the tropical island of Koh Phangan as a center for training, teaching, and research into the martial and healing art of Kalari. He will be giving us a short presentation later in the session. And I now request Kotiki to please play video by Mr. Bori.
Hi, firstly, apologies that I'm not there to deliver this talk in person. It's just that the Paralympics are going on at this point in time, and having a deep commitment to the Para Games, I will have to be there to do many more lives. That is why, unfortunately, I'm not there to deliver this talk in person. Having said that, I mean, sport diplomacy is a very important subject of soft power. So let's divide this into two parts. Forever, sport diplomacy has been used by people across the world. If you take the 19th century also, sport diplomacy was an integral aspect of empire building. In fact, the very civilizing mission ethos of the British Empire was rooted in sport diplomacy. The way the public school ethic was inculcated among people across the empire, you would have to say at the core of it was sport diplomacy. The very birth of the Olympic movement is rooted at one level in ritual and diplomacy, because these are key aspects of nation building, of getting people together, of unifying the world. Why do we have a Commonwealth Games, for example? Why do we have an Olympic Games? When Pierre de Coubertin launched the Olympic Games, it is also about ritual. Yes, there is sporting competition, but the essence of the Olympic Games, a cultural Olympiad, the ritual of sport is very real. And that's where the whole world comes together in a manner that is extremely significant. So when in the Paralympic Games, for example, you have the Afghanistan flag. Yes, the athletes aren't there, but you have the Afghanistan flag, and you understand the significance of these sporting mega events. India, Pakistan, again, I mean, a case study where sport diplomacy has played a major role twice. Between 1961 and 1978, no diplomatic relations, political relations were strained. Finally, in 1978, it was a cricket tour that renewed India-Pakistan contact. So it was obviously sport diplomacy. Again, if you take the 1989 to 2004 period, it has to be sport diplomacy under the Atal Bihari Vajpayee government, the Friendship Series, when India finally sent a team to Pakistan after a hiatus of 15 years. It was, sport diplomacy at its absolute best. So you've got to, I mean, there are these examples in history where sport has been used as an object of diplomatic maneuver by teams, by nations, by politicians, by countries. And according to me, mega events are also subject of such diplomatic understanding. And there are very specific cases, where nations come together in unique manners. The Tokyo Olympics has just ended. Let me give you a very specific example from Tokyo. Because of COVID, every country was asked to send in a number of, based on the number of athletes that qualified from every country, X number of officials were allowed to accompany the athletes. So in India's case, and it was 33% of the number of athletes in a particular discipline. So if there were 7 people in wrestling who qualified, there'll be 3 or maybe 3 officials who can participate or accompany the athletes. So in wrestling, one of India's most favored athletes was Bajrang Punia. Unfortunately, Bajrang's individual coach could not be accredited by the Wrestling Federation of India or the Indian Olympic Association, because they had a generic coach, a physio, and people like that accompanying the other wrestlers. So it was a problem. It was a problem, and obviously for Bajrang, who has trained with Shako Benitididis for several years, it was a problem not to have his personal coach sitting at the, sitting or standing there next to the mat, training with him, encouraging him. So the solution was unique. Shako managed to get an accreditation from the Hungarian Olympic Committee. Yes, you heard me right. He managed to get an accreditation from the Hungarian Olympic Committee, and interestingly, and he managed to get himself to Tokyo. The Indians took advantage of the situation and requested Shako to be with Bajrang in his corner. The International Olympic Committee and the organizers consented to it, provided the Hungarian Olympic Committee had no problem. And number 2, if Shako, when he was with Bajrang, decided to wear an Indian jersey. The Hungarian Olympic Committee actually consented, and that's where sport diplomacy becomes the central operative word. The Hungarian Olympic Committee consented to the Indian approach, and as a result of it, Shako was there with Bajrang, next to Bajrang, when he came for that bronze medal fight, and it was his coach's strategy which may have made a big difference to Bajrang eventually going on and winning that particular medal for India. So as I said, it is of paramount importance to try and understand the relevance of sport diplomacy and its role in soft power. Take bilateral cricket tours, for example. Australia. The India-Australia tour of 2020-21. Obviously the borders were closed, but separate concessions were made for the cricketers. The Ashes of this year, the current the tour that is on, India versus England in the United Kingdom. When the Indian team traveled to the United Kingdom in end May, early June, India was witnessing a horrid second wave of COVID. Normal circumstances, India was in the red list and the borders were closed. Special arrangements were worked out between the England Cricket Board and the Indian Cricket Board. Governments came in, a corridor was opened up. Obviously, multiple tests and everything else and quarantine was done. But Indians were given special permission to travel, and even within quarantine, they were given special permission to train. That's where sport diplomacy, because this helps in nation building and it helps in the two countries coming together in all aspects, trade, political dialogue, diplomatic dialogue, and that's where the sport diplomacy becomes of great significance. The other thing that I want to point to is how sport and mega events become tools or templates where political statements can be made, diplomatic statements can be made. So when India and Pakistan aren't playing bilateral cricket with each other, aren't playing bilateral sport with each other, they are still participating and taking on each other in multidiscipline contests, be it the World Cup, be it the Olympics, be it the Asian Games, be it the Commonwealth Games. Now these forums also serve as dialogue. Very recently, Neeraj Chopra and the Pakistani javelin thrower Arshad, they were in the bus together traveling to the Tokyo main Olympic Stadium. Even during the Asian Games, the two of them were in the podium together. And it became a major site of bonhomie, of camaraderie between an Indian and a Pakistani athlete. Even more recently, when Neeraj made that statement that Arshad was sort of trying to check out his javelin on the eve of the final, people made a lot of that statement and started trolling the Pakistani. Neeraj came and clarified that do not use sport as a platform for negative trolling. That's what sport diplomacy is all about. That's what Aman Ki Asha is all about. Even when the two countries aren't in political dialogue, there can be a diplomatic dialogue on the field of sport. At a personal level, I can tell you I'm as much friends with Shoaib Malik as with Sania Mirza. When the wedding happened, there was much talk, but it has made a difference. Ehsanul Haq, Rohan Bopanna and Aisha Qureshi playing together in the circuit in tennis. Again, a clear instance, they were called the Indo-Pak Express and it made a difference. When I talk to a Shoaib Akhtar or to a Ramiz Raja and Pakistani cricketers, they're all very close friends. We've done multiple conclaves together, multiple events together. Even when today I want to talk to a fast bowler, I dial up Shoaib Akhtar and he's a regular on my show. Now there are these people-to-people contacts at an interpersonal level where sport diplomacy operates, bringing people of two countries together, and that's why people-to-people contact is so very significant. So yes, you know what, I mean, and anybody who says, oh, sport and politics do not mix, that's the biggest nonsense of all. When you stand with your hand on your heart and the national anthem is played, be it at the Olympic stage or the cricket stadium, it is a political act. So sport will forever be used as a plane to make political statements and to make diplomatic statements. It is a political forum. Be it John Carlos and Tommy Smith and the Black Salute, be it Muhammad Ali, the Olympic movement, every major sporting field will have a political connotation. Always will. That is why it will also be a major plank for sporting diplomacy. It's a very important aspect in our world and forever will be a very important aspect in our world, especially when we are trying to combat evils of, of terror and other such things that are gaining in ascendancy in our world, sport and sport diplomacy has a major role to play. I hope I've been able to make a few points. Next time would want to be there and love to be there to address you in person. Thanks for listening and hope you have a great conference.
Thank you, Boviji. We now invite Ms. Christina and Sumit Sinhaji to share their thoughts.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting us to this particular session. Great to hear from other panelists in terms of how soft power is working in the Indian context. When it comes to indoor games, we are passionate board gamers as well as indoor gamers. And we believe that one of the things that we realize about, playing board games for a very, very long time is that a lot of Indian themed games were missing. So while chess is very prevalent, carom is very prevalent, snakes and ladders among kids is very prevalent. But when you talk about board games using Indian themes to not only play with people, and they could be cross-cultural, across the culture, people could be playing together. But when it comes to Indian-centric, Indian-themed games, there are very, very few games out there in the market, which also help contextualize what has happened in the past. So we did a massive research in about 2 years ago, where we interviewed about 10,000 people in India, and there was a massive demand for Indian-centered, Indian-themed games at that point in time. And we felt that while there are so many other games which teach you about World War, which teach you about US history, European history, Australian history, and so on and so forth, but there are hardly any games which talk and teach you about anything about Indian culture, Indian history, which, by the way, happens to be extremely rich and is probably far more older than any of the other cultures out here. And that's where we felt that there's an inherent need for people to learn, understand, and appreciate Indian culture. And once they start playing, it not only builds bonds among the family, but if you have people from outside India as well, it builds bonds with them. And that's essentially what Go India Games is about. And we try really, really hard to build games which are Indian-centric. More importantly, we are also using a lot of existing Indian art and culture, which is part of our board games, which allows us to relate what all do we do as part of large gaming industry which is out there in the market. For example, Channapatna Toys, it's a very, very old industry. And the work that they do is extremely, extremely traditional as well as very, very old. And those guys are losing relevance today. And it is important that we bring them to the front and center. We tell the world that this kind of games, these kind of toys and products do exist, and take it to the rest of the world for them to also enjoy and understand that India has not been behind in some of these things, but is now coming front and center, and the world can actually enjoy Indian games as well as the traditional art and systems which exist in India. So that is the point of view of Go India Games. I'll let Chris talk more about her journey.
Hi, everyone. I would like to start with a personal story. I'm sorry if I would get a little bit emotional on the process. It's something that I have not revealed to a lot of people. It's something very personal to me. So I was born 40 years ago in an Eastern European country, which was still under the Russian occupation. It was a communist regime under complete dictatorship. You can pretty much imagine like a soft version of what you see now in North Korea. So there was not so much food available. We had food rations. There was zero freedom of expression. Our intellectuals were being literally kidnapped from the streets and put in prisons for speaking up their minds, for speaking about faith, for speaking about culture and traditions. We were not allowed to listen to the radio, or we were not allowed to buy books that were anything else except the doctrine of the communist regime in force. What my parents used to do, they were bringing books in grocery bags. So they were literally hiding the books under potatoes and tomatoes. And they were risking their lives by doing that. So what I learned from them is that there are people willing to risk their lives and their families in order to be rooted and still keep the link with their culture and traditions. So that image of an 8-year-old girl seeing their parents risking our lives to still have access to what was important and native to them stayed with me throughout the years. 20 years later, when I came here to India and I saw the amount of culture available here, I saw the freedom of expression, I saw the crafts, I saw everything that India has to offer. And still, there were so many children in this industry, in the board game, market. They were still playing with Barbie dolls, and they were still playing Monopoly. And I think it's nothing wrong if you play with Barbie dolls and Monopoly, as long as that's your choice. But it shouldn't be the only option. It should be a choice, not the only option. Because when you looked on the Indian market back then, like 3, 4, 5 years ago, there weren't enough board games presenting the modern side of the, Indian board game industry, except the traditional side, which was there for, centuries, like, chess and board, snake and ladders and the traditional games. But while the Western board game industry was progressing towards including more and more content, more and more games, the modern board game industry in India was stagnant. There was nothing happening. So that was the moment when I felt that I want to bring a product in India, that I want to create something which is 100% made in India, conceptualized in India, having everyone, Indians who work on coming up with the idea. That's why we have actually surveyed 10,000 consumers in India to be able to voice their opinion, for their voice to come through the content that we create. We wanted Indian illustrators to, to shine, to show how beautiful the Indian paintings and illustrations can be. We wanted the Indian content creators to come forward with their creations. And we wanted the artisans of India, like the Channapatna crafts, to come in play and to create a product which is a high standard production value product that can, our children, the Indian children, can have access to. So they can have more choices and more options on the market than just the traditional Indian board games or just the Western side of the board games that were slowly penetrating in India. So we are so happy that after 3 years of conceptualizing our first game, which is called Bharata 600 BC, we are able to create, and succeed to complete this exercise of having the first high value production board game, modern board game in India, which presents a part of our Indian history. It is based on the 6th century BC India, the time of the 16 Mahajanapadas, where the entire research and history that we have presented is based on all the archaeological findings, on all the beautiful, artworks, and also history, critics and books that are present in India. So we have spent more than a year to understand how to even illustrate every single garment on our characters in the book, even what type of dyes were used back then to color the garments of the people of the 6th century BC. Because we have to remember that in 6th century BCE, there was no paper available. So people couldn't record what was actually happening. So most of this information comes from archaeological findings and comes from paintings on the temples or on forts. So a lot of research had to be done. But we are so happy that we can conclude this exercise and have something that the Indian children and the Indian adults can ravish now and can, you know, have more options on the table. So yeah, this is why we wanted to do this. This is the personal aspect of why I wanted to do this. And I wanted to, you know, I wanted to be grateful for India for hosting me here for over a decade, for allowing me to, you know, to flourish as an individual. I wanted to do something for India in return. And I found this niche where I thought I could be influential, where, you know, using a part of the soft power available to me and to India, we can take this initiative where we bring Indians together for the Indian board game industry.
Thank you so much, Christina. We will take some questions at the end of the session, if that's okay with you. Thank you so much, Sumit.
Thank you.
We now invite Sri Adam Phillips to give his presentation. You're muted, Adam. You're muted.
So sorry. Is that better?
Yes, it's lovely.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. My name is Adam Phillips. I'm a teacher of Kalari Payat. It's an Indian martial art, which you may or may not be familiar with. It's becoming more and more known. So more and more Indians and people outside of India are becoming aware of it. I've been practicing for around 20 years and I'm now teaching. I'm also practicing the treatment side. So it has a martial art side and a treatment side. I kind of came prepared today to do like a physical practice session, if you'd like that, or we can answer some questions, whatever people prefer.
I think we can have a physical sessions to shake ourselves up.
Okay, so should we just begin something for like 20 minutes or so?
Sure. Thank you.
Great. So before we start then, I'll just give you a brief introduction of what we're going to look at. So in Kalari, we have 3 styles, Northern, Southern, and Central, which come from those geographical regions of Kerala, Northern, Southern, and Central Kerala. My training was done in the north of Kerala. So primarily I've learned Northern style, but my teacher was also trained in Southern and Central style. So I have learned some aspects of that. So actually what we'll do today, we'll look at some warm-ups from Central style. Then we'll look at a small form combining a few positions, what we call Vadivu from Northern style. And then we'll look at a bit of Southern style as well, just to see the three different approaches. I won't say any more than that. We'll just stand up and begin. And then any questions, you can come to me afterwards. So you're going to need a bit of space around you. I'm quite fortunate here. I have a lot of space. So just make sure you have enough space so that you can move your arms like this. And you can ideally stand up like this without touching anything above you. And if you have a bit of space in front of you and a bit of space behind you, that's also excellent. So to start with, just standing square. So just balanced here. When your feet approximately shoulder width apart. And just bring your hands together in front. Now, actually, when we join the hands, this is connecting the male and female nadis, the main energy meridians of the body. So this actually helps to balance you just doing like this. Just take a moment there, just feel the body. And then I'd like to step back. Now, traditionally, men would step with the right side and touch the ground with the right hand. Women, they would step with the left, touch the ground with the left side. And then with that hand, you would touch the heart, the mind, and like this onto the leg. So you make like a cup, like this, and drop it onto the leg. So, yeah. Now what this does, this is just like to give an end, a punctuation point, to say that, okay, now we move on, next section. So we're not retaining and the mind becoming cluttered. We just move through the practice, okay? That's one way of thinking about it. So then to start with, we'll look at some low heart exercises. These are warm-up exercises from central style. So I'd like just to start with the hands together and to open up and to come back down. So you're bringing the hands slightly above the height of the shoulder, not here, but here, and then back down. And as you do this, you bring together the shoulder blades in the back. You squeeze together in the back, the shoulder blades, and you push up onto the toes. So we go up, down, up, down, up, down. And then bring down the hands in the front. And now we're going to go this way, up, down, up, down. And we'll do 7 times. Good. And then this way, up the side. Again, 7 times. So you want to be looking straight. Try to keep your eyes on one place. If the eyes get tired, just move to a new place. But try to keep the eyes there in front of you. Now, for the next one, we're going to bring the hands to here. We keep the feet very square. Make 2 fists and stick the thumbs underneath the armpit. And then rotate. One side, other side. Now, as you rotate, you want to look to the point of the elbow behind you. That will mean that you rotate the whole spine. One way, other way. Again, 7 times. And then bring the arms, place them on the legs. And here, sliding up. 1, 2. 1, 2. Again, as you lift up, look to the elbow. Then down. Lift up, look to the elbow. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. Good. Now bring the hands and place them just on the navel. And we're going to go now down into forward flexion. Next, and come back up. So be sure to drop your head completely and to bring the chin onto the chest. If you like, you can press a little into the body. Here, press. As you go down, press. Good, okay. So for those of you familiar with the myofascial lines in the body, you might notice that we're actually moving through those. And I'll talk about that later if you're interested. Now for the next one, I want us just to lift up one leg to catch it and to put it back down. So try to catch it here in the crease of the elbow and down. Up, down, up, down, up, down. And those of you who are feeling daring, here, underneath. 1, 2, 1, 2. So yeah, this is very difficult if you're just learning this for the first time, but just to give you an idea. Okay, now, I want you to bring the feet apart. Take the right hand behind the back. Hold it with the left hand here. And then turn to the side. Come down through the leg and come up. Then open, release. Down. Legs and up. Open, release. Down, the leg and up. Once more on either side. Good. Okay, so now roll the arms here and back. And then bring the feet together. Reach up with the hands. Forward and down. Forward and down. And then bring down the arms. And we come back to where we started, this neutral position. And again, just resting and feeling the body. You should feel now a little energized, a little woke up, body a little bit buzzing. And we'll make this same gesture. Okay, so now we're going to go on and look at something from Northern style. Just going to look on the time, make sure I stay on track. So, feet are together. Hands are together. Elbows are together. You're standing like this. Then, open the right foot, just a little bit, here. Lift up the left foot. And as you do, you can bring the hands to here. And then, step forward onto that left foot. So you step forward into a lunge. Try to keep this front foot straight, not turning inside and outside. Just one moment, just one moment. Okay, I think they stopped. Sorry for that. So, feet together, hands together, open here, lift up, and again, step forward onto the left leg. Thank you so much. Thank you. Just 20 minutes. And then leaning forward and here, stretching the body forward. So what we want to have is the pelvis is square. Try not to twist. So all we're doing is stepping forward and leaning the body forward and reaching the hands here and back. Okay, now we can do on the other side. We open now the left foot. Lift the right side. Step forward onto that right leg. Pelvis stays square. You lean forward. Back leg stays down. Now try not to open it like this. Try to keep it as a small angle at the back. Lean forward. This will protect your knee. And the arms are here. Good. Once more, either side. Open the right. Lift the left. Step forward. Here. And back. Open the left. Lift the right. Step forward. Here. So this is your right horse. This one here, left horse. Asva Varibu, horse, posture. Now, we're going to link them together with a small arm movement. So we start in the same position. Open the right, lift the left, step forward into the horse. Left hand back here to the chest. So you bring this left hand straight back. Then the right hand comes down and over. And as it comes over, you step through. So the hand comes to here. Left hand here, right horse. Once more. Open the right, lift the left, step forward into horse. Left hand back, right hand down, over to the knee. Right horse. Once more. Open the right, lift the left, step forward into horse. Left hand back, then right hand here, down, over to the knee. So left hand on the chest, right hand on the knee, and you're in right horse. Then the hand comes here, around the head to here. Once more, from here, around the head. Once more, around the head. And then lift up here. This we call rooster position. So we go from here, around the head, lift up. From here, around the head, lift up, and then step down to this neutral position and bring the hands to here, like this. Okay, once more, just that last part. From here, around the head, lift up. So left hand on the left foot, right hand on the right ear, and then step down together. Beginning. Open the right foot, lift up the left leg, step forward into the horse. Left hand back, right hand down, over, right hand to the knee. Then right hand around the head, lift up, step down, hands come together. Now here, just go up and bring the palms together, looking at the hand. Fold at your waist, all the way down. Then come back up on the same line, bring your thumb, press here on your forehead and to the front. Once more. From here, around the head, lift up, step down, hands together and up, forward, back, in front. Okay, we're moving quite quickly, so I hope that you can retain a little bit and follow along. Open the right, lift the left, step forward into the horse. Left hand back, right hand down, again forward to the horse. Then around the head, lift up, step down, come together, forward and down, back, in front. Turn the hands around, and we're going to go down. Now, from here, turn the hands around this way, like you're twisting the body, just like we did with this exercise here. So twist the body, and then the hands, it's like, imagine a road going like this, and like this, a pathway, like this, like this. Your hands are going to do the same, here, and then around to this point, and then you're going to go down. So from here, around to here. See from the side, here, here. 1, 2. 1, 2. To the side, over. Now, and I know we're moving very quickly here, so I hope that we can, we are together. When we go from here, we're going to dive down into probably the most fundamental posture in Kalari, elephant pose. Oh, big bumblebee here. Okay, so for the elephant pose, for the elephant pose, I want you to have the feet together, open the toes like this, and then, yeah, big B, okay, open the toes, and then again, open the feet like this. Now, the space between your feet, 1, 2, 3 hands, 2.5 to 3. 1, 2, 3, okay? Once more, so bring the feet together, open the toes, open the feet. This is the distance that you want. 1, 2, 3. 3 maximum. Now, from here, we bring the arms up to clap above the head, like this. And then, bring down the arms. Fingers first come together like this. Then the thumb on top. So, fingers together, thumb on top, elbows together, and bring the hands to the chest here. So up, down, here. Here, see, notice my elbows, they're open. And then from here, I'm just going to dive down like this. So up, down to the chest. Now, here, sit back. This is the most important part, to sit back. See? So from here, I sit back. My knees then come back to be above my feet. Yeah? What you'll see many people do is just do that, sit down. But then I can just be pushed over. Actually, there's no strength. Sit back. Then this all engaged. So this is the position. So let's try going into it together. The feet open. 1, 2. The arms up. Fingers down, thumb on top. Elbows together. Elbows apart. Now, as we go down, we sit back to that chair. Sit back as much you can. And as you sit back, don't let the knees come together. Instead, open them. And you'll feel the arch of your foot lifting up here. And that's a sign that you're getting it right. Then lift the chest up here. And try to bring the arms together like this. So you're sitting back, opening the knees, flat feet, and lift the chest up here. Put the arms together. Okay, difficult position, but very effective. Okay, so now I want to put that together with what we had before. Feet together, hands together. Open the foot, lift the left leg, step forward into the horse. Left hand back, right hand down and over. Right horse. Right hand, cover around the head. Left leg meets the left hand. Step down. Hands come together. Going up. Hands join together. Forward and down. Come back up. Bring the thumb. Press the forehead. Thumb to the front. And now we go down. Around. Over. And here, sit back, open the knees, lift up into elephant. Try to hold it. Keep your knees open. Sit back. Your knees, you don't want them to become forward or inside. You want them square above your ankles as much as you can. And relax. Okay, so actually I think we're going to run out of time. We won't have time to look at the southern, so I'll just show you very quickly in 30 seconds. So this form that we've done is from Northern style. Northern style you can think of as a martial hatha yoga. It's following very much that same understanding that a physical position, a physical movement will transform the internal. Yeah, it will change your thoughts and emotions through physical action. Now, Southern style is street fighting. So here, step back, block, slap, cut, turn, block, slap, cut, block, slap, cut, block, slap, cut, finish. Okay, that's the first form. There are many forms, but I just show you that one. Okay, so maybe we want to bring now, actually, just to finish, bring the feet together, open the toes, and reach up. And once more, we're going to take 3 forward bends. 1, 2, 3. Bring down the arms. And again, just standing neutrally, hands together. Just take a moment to rest. And then men stepping back with the right leg, women the left, touching the ground, finishing there. Excellent. So maybe we could come back now and have some questions. If anyone wants to ask any questions about Kalari or about what we've just done specifically.
Thank you so much, Adam. I don't see a question from the audience, so if I ask enough time.
Uh-huh.
What in the usual Kalari tradition, you practice in a pit, right? So, and earthen pit. So
That's
what is the
correct.
difference between, what's the difference between practicing on cemented floor like the one you have and in the earthen pit? What is the significance of
Yeah, excellent
doing it
question.
there?
Yeah, I mean, this here, the floor is wooden. So it's, I mean, a cement floor would be on the same level almost, you know, neither of them are particularly forgiving. A wooden floor is a bit more forgiving in the sense that there's a bit of give in it. So it's a bit better for us when we're jumping around. But when it comes to the pit, there are many reasons why we use it. So let me try to go over that briefly for you. Firstly, if we remember that the roots of Kalari come from shamanism, it was originally a shamanic practice. And actually the positions, the vadivu, is not about mimicking the animal, but it's about positioning the geometry of the physical body in such a way that the energy of the body is moving through a pattern or moving through the channels in now a new shape. And that transform the fighting mind of the practitioner. So actually what we're trying to do is to touch on the fighting mind of those different animals in that moment just before they attack. So that moment of complete attention. So in that sense, we because it's as a shamanic art, it's about touching on these animal natures, but it's also about touching on the elements. So for that reason, they put us into the ground. So we are grounded. We are very much inside the earth. Yeah, that's the first reason. The second reason is so that we have protection from the elements. I mean, most students in many schools will start early in the morning around 4 o'clock, but they usually practice through till around 8 o'clock or later on the weekends. So certainly by that time, it's can be becoming warm. And if it's raining, of course, this is going to be a problem. So by going into the pit, and the pit is dug 21 feet or by 42 feet, so 7 by 14 meters and 90 centimeters deep. And then all of that earth is taken and put around the wall to make another 90 centimeter wall onto which the roof is placed. So the roof is placed like this and is left open at the ends. So there is circulation of air, but the air doesn't go directly onto the body. Now, if we were to practice outside, the body is covered in oil. The reason we cover the body in oil is to encourage sweating. And when we encourage sweating, we push out from the body the toxins which we are producing from training every day, or the lactic acid and so on, which otherwise would accumulate in the body. So we put oil on the body to help this to come out. But that means we are sweating a lot. So if we are to go outside and practice, then the wind on the body will imbalance the humor, according to Ayurveda. So to practice away from the wind and away from the sun and away from the rain is the second reason. So first reason, connection to the ground. Second reason, protection from the elements. Third reason, ego. If I go on the beach and I start to do all my Kalari practice, I will become a very arrogant person. You know? Look at me, how great I am. So instead, we do it in a place where there's no one to show off to. Everyone else is doing it as well. Yeah, maybe you show off for the first days, but then you're bored of that. So you just get on and focus. The last reason is that it's secret art, especially as you go on to the more advanced stages, and all of the kind of deadly techniques, very much secretive. You know, it's very important that the student is ready and is not going to be going to do some harm with learning this technique. So for that reason, it's kept in a place where it can't be copied. In fact, when my teacher was teaching me the Mama techniques for treatment, he showed me ways of doing it with a cloth. So I can do the treatment for someone without anyone being able to learn it and copy it. They're very, very secretive like that. So we've got secrecy, kind of control the ego, if you like, being out of the elements and being in the ground. And so when you lose all of that, it's quite a big shock in a sense, because you don't have that protection. You don't have that sacred temple space that you go into. We make this same gesture when we go in and when we leave. And my teacher used to say, you're putting your ego down and you come into practice. And please remember to take it with you when you leave. Don't leave it there. But when you then find yourself practicing in a space, I mean, I'm lucky here, I have a good space, but when we have to practice on concrete, or if you have to practice on a ground which is less forgiving or less private, or you have to be a bit more careful for those obvious reasons which I mentioned before.
Thank you. Could I ask Sumit and Christiana if if you had to make a board game based on coloring, what kind of gameplay and what would be the interactive elements that would interest you, having seen Adam's session?
That's a very, very interesting question,
which we haven't thought before.
which we haven't thought about. But definitely, looking at Adam, I think there are a lot of interesting. If let's say it has to be imitated on some kind of a illustration, we'll get some fantastic poses, and postures which can be replicated. For example, the elephant pose, the rooster pose. How do you kind of be in that pose or in that posture, and potentially replicate it in a visual art format? I think that'll be very, very interesting for a lot of people to understand and learn from it.
For me, I think the environment is so vital. Everything that Adam has said about, being grounded and all the elements and also the pit and so on form for this thematic, the theme of the board game being so strong. I also feel that, it could work aspect, and probably that would be the utmost essence of the game. But of course, in terms of mechanics, every game, what players and the consumers don't see, there is a lot of mathematics involved. So in order for the game to be all the time, the replayability to be there, and also for players to, not be, the game shouldn't be biased towards a certain mechanics or towards a certain style of playing. So the balance of the game, of the mechanics, is very, very important. So in order to achieve that, there is a lot of mathematics involved. So that's something that, if someone would tell you how would you see a game and what type of mechanics, until you actually sit with a piece of paper and pen and make all this come together, it would be very hard to actually conceptualize it. But I think a lot of elements are really beautiful. And Adam, we were just thinking here, me and Sumit, if we should also stand up and replicate whatever you're doing. We were so envious of you, looking at the beautiful environment you have behind. It's just fantastic. I think.
Yeah.
Where are you right now? Are you in Kerala?
I'm in Thailand. Yeah. I've been here
you're
since.
In Thailand.
Yeah. I came here to start up because you see, one thing I was aware of, that there is unfortunately some reluctance amongst Western women sometimes to come to India and to learn these soft power forms, if you like, to engage in that. And so when I came here to Koh Phangan, which is an island where there is a big kind of yoga community where hundreds of men and women, and obviously more women than men, probably like 2 to 1, 3 to 1, come for learning yoga. So there was potentially people here that I thought would be interested in Kalari. So I set myself up here about 5 years ago to teach. And it's gone pretty well. I've had a lot of people come through, and now obviously we're struggling. But I've moved online now, and I did actually move online just before COVID started. And it's funny that we're talking about board games, and that's what you're doing, because in order to stay in Thailand, I've applied for a smart visa. It's like a business-based visa to create to push our online platform to be more virtual, the learning experience. And one thing that I want to do is gamify it. And I've been thinking how, to make like a map, where they move through this map and they're learning at different points on the map. They're receiving the lessons. So the course is like a 108 lesson course, right? So they could go to this spot and do this lesson, and this spot and do this lesson. And in order to get from here to here, they could have to say, send me a video of themselves doing elephant, for example, and so on and so on. So yeah, perhaps we can speak more about this, because this is something I'm definitely going to have to do or want to do.
I think that's a great idea. I think people would really love it. Like, gamification is something so important nowadays, and for what you're doing and for what companies in general want to achieve, to attract people to achieve a certain goal in a fun way and in a meaningful way. So I think you're really on the great path.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Adam, Sumiti, and Christiana, for a lovely session. And the endeavor of the Center for Soft Power is to bring together such connections, and all of us build this up to the next level. And we are so happy that if you could engage together and create a wonderful new board game, or even
Fantastic.
online game. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Really, thank you.
Arunima? Thank you. Okay, I will end this session. Thank you so much, and it's been wonderful listening to all three of you, and of course Boriji and Adam. It was such a strange. I mean, coincidences are always strange. But one of your students, Chitra, had mailed me asking if she could interview you for our magazine. I said, wow, here we have a potential speaker for our conference. So it's lovely to connect all of you, and we hope we can have many more sessions together, and also cooperate and collaborate for other things also.
Certainly.
Today is the last day of Namaste 2021, our annual Soft Power Festival. We have one last session of soft power diplomacy. So far, we have been talking about the elements of soft power, that is Ayurveda, yoga, games, textiles, crafts. But in the evening, we'll actually also talk a little bit about a part of the session would be about negotiations and the political aspects of diplomacy and the digital diplomacy, and how India can go forward, projecting all the different soft power traditions that she has. Please do join us for that session. We have many eminent speakers. We have Ayurveda doctors. We have young practitioners in the field of medicine and healthcare. We have diplomacy experts from the University of Southern California, from Tel Aviv University, from Hong Kong, and we have the Vice Chancellor of a university in South Karnataka, the Chancellor. And please do join us for the evening session. And thank you once again for a very sportive and sporty and lively session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Bye.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste.